The courtroom aboard Concordia Prime was silent except for the soft hum of the artificial gravity generators. The massive space station floated in neutral territory, far from any star system that might claim it. Here, the Galactic War Crimes Tribunal held court, judging the actions of species across the known galaxy. Today was different. Today, they would hear something that had never been spoken before in these halls. Zektar sat in the witness chair, his chitinous armor bearing scars that told stories of battles no one wanted to hear. His compound eyes, once bright with the confidence of a hegemony officer, now darted around the room like a trapped animal. The claws on his four hands clicked nervously against the metal surface of the chair. Every few seconds his entire body would tremble, as if remembering something terrible. The tribunal consisted of 7 judges from different species. There was Judge Velshani, a tall blue-skinned Altarian with silver robes. Judge Court, a massive rock-like being from the Titan worlds whose voice rumbled like an earthquake. Judge Limara, whose translucent form shifted colors with her emotions. Each species had fought wars before. Each had conquered worlds and been conquered in turn. But none of them had heard what Zektar was about to tell them. Judge Velshani looked down at her notes, then at the broken creature before them. Officer Zektar of the 3rd Hegemony Fleet, she began, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of legal precedent. You stand accused of war crimes against the human species. You have claimed that your actions were justified by extraordinary circumstances. The tribunal is ready to hear your testimony. Zektar's mandibles clicked together, a sign of extreme distress in his species. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, forcing the translation devices to strain to pick up his words. Honored judges, he began, what I am about to tell you will sound impossible. It will sound like the ravings of a broken mind. But every word is true and every word is recorded in our battle logs. He paused, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the courtroom walls. We thought we knew war. The hegemony has conquered 47 systems. We have fought the Crystalline Confederacy, the Machine Collective, the Psi-Lords of Andromeda. We won every time because we understood our enemies. We knew their limits, their breaking points, their biology. Another pause. We understood nothing about humans. Judge Court leaned forward, his granite features showing interest. Officer Zektar, the record shows that humans have only had faster-than-light travel for 18 standard months. Their technology is primitive compared to the hegemony. Their worlds had no significant defenses. How could such a species present any real challenge to your forces? For the first time since entering the courtroom, Zektar looked directly at one of the judges. His compound eyes fixed on Judge Court with an intensity that made several spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats. That, honored judge, is exactly what we thought. That is exactly why we are all dead. A murmur ran through the gallery. The Hegemony 3rd Fleet had been legendary. 12,000 ships, 2 million soldiers. The finest military force their empire had ever assembled. If Zektar was to be believed, they had been destroyed by a species that had barely learned to leave their own solar system. The humans, Zektar continued, his voice growing slightly stronger, are not like other species. We have fought creatures with superior technology, beings with psychic powers, hive minds that could coordinate perfectly across vast distances. But humans are different. They are the most terrifying warriors the galaxy has ever produced, and they do not even know it themselves. Judge Limara, her form shifting to deep purple, spoke next. Officer Zektar, you speak as if humans possess some supernatural ability. Yet our analysis shows they are physically weak, have no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no psychic abilities. They appear to be one of the most vulnerable species we have encountered. Zektar laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was the laugh of someone who had seen too much and understood too little until it was too late. Yes, honored judge. That is exactly what we thought. Soft flesh, no natural weapons, short lifespans, weak bodies. We classified them as Category 7 threats. Minimal resistance expected. Our strategists estimated complete conquest in 36 standard hours. He looked around the courtroom again, his eyes stopping on each judge in turn. We were fools. We measured their bodies and missed their souls. We counted their weapons and ignored their will. We saw their individual weakness and failed to understand their collective strength. By the time we realized our mistake, it was far too late. Judge Velshani made a note on her tablet. Officer Zektar, the tribunal requires specific testimony about the events that transpired. We need facts, not philosophical observations. Please tell us about your first contact with human forces. Zektar nodded slowly, his mandibles clicking again. Of course, honored judge. The facts. Yes, I will give you the facts. But I warn you, the facts about humans are more disturbing than any philosophy. He took what passed for a deep breath in his species, his chest plates expanding and contracting. It began 6 standard months ago when our long-range scouts detected the human homeworld. But before he could continue, his entire body began to shake violently. The court medic, a gentle, empathic healer, quickly moved to his side. The witness is experiencing severe psychological distress, she announced to the court. His fear responses are unlike anything in my database. Whatever he experienced has fundamentally altered his neural patterns. Judge Velshani looked concerned. In all her years on the tribunal, she had never seen a witness react this way to simple questions about military engagement. Officer Zektar, do you need time to compose yourself? Zektar shook his head, though the trembling continued. No, honored judge. Time will not help. Time only makes the memories clearer. Time only makes me more certain of what I know. He looked up at the ceiling as if searching for strength. The galaxy must know what humans are capable of. The galaxy must understand what we have awakened. And so, in that sterile courtroom aboard Concordia Prime, surrounded by the most powerful judges in the galaxy, a broken hegemony officer prepared to tell the most terrifying story in galactic history. A story about a small, weak species that had somehow become the stuff of nightmares. A story about humans at war. The courtroom had grown quiet after the medic's assessment. Judge Velshani gave Zektar a moment to collect himself before speaking again. Officer Zektar, when you are ready, please tell us about your first contact with the human species. Zektar's compound eyes focused on the floor as he began to speak. It was 6 months ago by your standard calendar. Our deep space sensors had detected a new species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel. This was not unusual. The hegemony encounters primitive species every few years. Our protocol is simple. Assess their threat level, catalog their resources, and begin incorporation into the Empire. He paused, his claws scraping against the metal chair. The initial scans were encouraging from our perspective. The humans had only recently developed their first crewed jump drives. Their ships were slow, inefficient, and built with materials we considered barely adequate for interstellar travel. Their weapons technology was centuries behind ours. They had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no quantum torpedoes. Judge Court rumbled. What did your analysis teams conclude about human combat capabilities? That was the most tragic mistake we could have made, Zektar replied, his voice growing quieter. Our xenobiologists studied captured human transmissions. They analyzed human physical structure from intercepted medical data. Their report was dismissive. He looked up at the judges. I can recite it from memory. Every word is burned into my mind. Zektar closed his eyes and began to speak in the formal tone of a military briefing. Species classification Homo sapiens. Average height 1.7 meters. Weight 70 kilograms. Natural armor, none. Natural weapons, minimal. Small teeth, weak claws. Defensive capabilities. Fragile skin, breakable bones, vulnerable organs. Combat assessment. Unsuitable for serious warfare. Psychological profile. Appears to be social pack animals with strong group bonding. Likely to surrender when faced with superior force. He opened his eyes and looked directly at Judge Limara. The report concluded that humans were physically inferior to 93% of known warrior species. They had no natural defenses, no instinctive combat abilities, and no apparent capacity for large-scale military organization. The recommendation was for a Category 7 classification, minimal resistance expected, standard pacification protocols approved. Judge Velshani made notes as he spoke. And what did standard pacification protocols involve in this case? Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly. The Third Fleet was assigned to the operation. 12,000 ships under Admiral Krekstar's command. The plan was simple. Demonstrate overwhelming superior force, destroy their primary military installations, demand surrender. If they refused, we would implement orbital bombardment of their major population centers until compliance was achieved. He continued. Admiral Krextar was confident the operation would be completed within 36 standard hours. He actually complained that the assignment was beneath the Third Fleet's capabilities. I remember his exact words. Why send our finest warriors to discipline children? The Admiral believed we could have achieved the same result with a tenth of our forces. Judge Court leaned forward. What was your role in this operation, Officer Zektar? I was Senior Intelligence Analyst for the Third Fleet. My job was to monitor human communications, assess their military responses, and provide tactical updates to our battle commanders. I was also responsible for identifying key human leadership targets and population centers for potential bombardment. His voice grew even quieter. I was very good at my job. I had successfully analyzed 17 previous conquest campaigns. I was proud of my efficiency in ending conflicts quickly with minimal hegemony casualties. Judge Limara, her form shifting to orange, asked, What was your assessment of human space infrastructure when you first entered their territory? Zektar almost smiled, but it was a bitter expression. Pathetic by our standards. They had colonized only 4 systems beyond their homeworld. Their fastest ships took weeks to travel distances our vessels could cover in hours. Their orbital stations were primitive, no significant weapons, minimal shielding, clearly designed for commerce rather than defense. Their military fleet, he continued, consisted of maybe 300 vessels, most of them converted civilian ships with basic armament. Our intelligence estimated that our vanguard alone, just 200 ships, could destroy their entire space navy without taking significant losses. Admiral Krextar dismissed the human fleet as a collection of flying scrap metal. Judge Velshani looked up from her notes. So the hegemony felt completely confident about this operation? More than confident, Zektar replied. We were bored. This was supposed to be a routine exercise. Some of our junior officers were disappointed they would not get real combat experience. The betting pools among the crew were not about whether we would win, but about how quickly the humans would surrender. Most bets were for less than 6 hours after our first demonstration of force. He paused, staring at his claws as they clicked against the chair. I remember reviewing the final intelligence briefing with Admiral Krextar. We had complete scans of their homeworld, Earth they called it. 12 billion inhabitants mostly concentrated in large cities. No significant orbital defenses, no planetary shield generators, no apparent underground military installations. The Admiral looked at the data and said, This is not war. This is pest control. Judge Court rumbled thoughtfully. Did you attempt any form of diplomatic contact before beginning military operations? Zektar's whole body shuddered. Standard protocol required one warning. Admiral Krextar had me transmit a message to the human homeworld on all their communication frequencies. The message was simple. This is Admiral Krextar of the Hegemony Third Fleet. Your species has been selected for incorporation into the Hegemony Empire. Surrender your military forces and prepare for occupation. You have 1 standard hour to comply. What was their response? Asked Judge Limara. Zektar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. The response came from their largest population center. It was broadcast on all frequencies, sent to every human colony, transmitted to every human ship in space. Just 2 words from their planetary leader. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the background hum of the station system seemed to fade as everyone waited for Zektar's next words. Never. Ever. That was their entire response to the most powerful military force in the galaxy. No negotiation. No request for terms. No attempt to buy time. Just those 2 words spoken with such certainty. Zektar looked up at the judges. That should have been our first warning that we did not understand what we were dealing with. Admiral Krextar laughed when he heard their response. Well, he said, at least this will be over quickly. He ordered the first wave to begin orbital bombardment of their military installations. The time was exactly 1432 ship time. I remember because that was the moment the galaxy changed forever and we were too blind to see it. Judge Velshani leaned forward. Officer Zektar, what happened when your forces began their attack? Zektar's eyes became distant, as if he was watching the events unfold again in his mind. That, honored judges, is when we discovered that everything we thought we knew about warfare was wrong. That is when we learned what humans become when they have nothing left to lose. The medic was monitoring Zektar's vital signs as he prepared to continue his testimony. His stress levels were dangerously high, but he insisted on continuing. Judge Velshani nodded for him to proceed. The first battle took place at New Olympia, Zektar began, his voice becoming strained. It was humanity's newest colony, established only 8 months before our arrival. Population, 200,000 civilians, maybe 3,000 militia members with basic training. Our intelligence indicated no significant defenses, no military installations of importance. Admiral Krextar assigned only 50 ships to the operation. "We do not need to waste ammunition on such a small target," he said. The plan was simple: orbital bombardment of their communication centers and power grid, followed by ground assault to secure any survivors for questioning. Standard procedure for a minor outpost. Judge Court leaned forward. "What was different about this battle, Officer Zektar?" Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly. Everything. Absolutely everything was different. The bombardment began at 15:20 ship time. Our plasma cannons destroyed their orbital station in the first salvo. Their power grid went down within minutes. Their communication array was vaporized. By all military doctrine, the battle should have been over. They had no way to coordinate resistance, no power for their defensive systems, no means of calling for help. But the humans did not surrender. They did not even respond to our surrender demands. Instead, he paused, his entire body trembling. Instead, they began to fight back. Not in any way our military manuals had prepared us for, not in any way we had ever encountered before. Judge Limara, her form shifting to deep red, asked, "How could a primitive colony fight back against orbital bombardment?" "They could not," Zektar replied simply, "so they found other ways. Within an hour of the bombardment, we detected energy signatures coming from the planet's surface. Small weapons. Nothing that could threaten our ships in orbit." Commander Vexidal laughed about it. "Look," he said, "the insects are throwing rocks at us." But then our transport ships began to approach for landing, and we learned that humans do not throw rocks. They had somehow jury-rigged their mining equipment, their construction vehicles, even their farming machines into anti-aircraft weapons. Machines that were never designed for war were suddenly shooting down our assault craft. Zektar's voice grew quieter. "That was when we first heard the battle cry. Every human settlement, every human ship, every human soldier, they all began transmitting the same 2 words over and over. Remember Earth." We did not understand what it meant at the time. We thought it was just some primitive war chant. Judge Velshani looked confused. But Earth was their homeworld. Why would they need to remember it? Zektar's entire body sagged as if the weight of his memories was crushing him. Because honored Judge Admiral Krextar had already destroyed it. In his impatience to end the conflict quickly, he had ordered the orbital bombardment of Earth immediately after the humans' refusal to surrender. 12 billion people died in the first hour of our campaign. We thought it would break their spirit. Instead, we had made the greatest mistake in galactic history. The courtroom was completely silent. Several judges sat back in their chairs, clearly shocked by this revelation. Judge Court was the first to speak. "Officer Zektar, are you telling this tribunal that the hegemony destroyed the human homeworld with its entire population in the opening hours of the conflict?" "Yes," Zektar whispered. "Standard doctrine for dealing with Category 7 species. Demonstrate overwhelming force by destroying their primary population center, according to our military psychology experts. This should have caused immediate surrender by all remaining human forces. Instead, it created something that had never existed in the galaxy before. An entire species with nothing left to lose." The ground assault at New Olympia became a nightmare, he continued. "Our soldiers were the finest warriors in the hegemony, trained from birth, equipped with the best armor and weapons our technology could provide. They were expecting to face frightened civilians hiding in bunkers. Instead, they found an entire population that had transformed overnight into something terrifying." Judge Limara asked, "What do you mean by transformed?" Zektar looked up at her with haunted eyes. "I mean that grief and rage had turned ordinary humans into the most dangerous opponents we had ever faced. Children, some no older than 12 of their years, were operating heavy weapons with deadly precision. Elderly humans who should have been cowering in shelters were building improvised explosive devices using household materials. But the worst part," he continued, "was watching humans continue to fight after they should have been dead. I watched through battle cameras as a human soldier had his arm severed by plasma fire. Instead of falling or retreating, he picked up his weapon with his remaining hand and charged our position. When that arm was destroyed too, he began throwing grenades with his teeth. Judge Court rumbled. That is physically impossible. Pain and blood loss should have incapacitated such a being. That is what our medical officers said, Zektar replied. But we watched it happen hundreds of times. Humans who should have been dead from their injuries, humans who should have been paralyzed by pain, humans who should have been broken by despair, all of them kept fighting. Our soldiers began to report that killing a human did not stop them. It only made the others fight harder. I remember one incident that broke the spirit of an entire hegemony battalion. They cornered a human medical officer in a collapsed building. She was treating wounded civilians, including several children. When our soldiers demanded her surrender, she looked up from her patients and said one word. No. They shot her. Direct plasma hit to the chest. She should have died instantly. Instead, she finished bandaging a child's wounds, stood up, picked up a rifle from a dead soldier, and single-handedly held off our entire squad while the civilians escaped. She died protecting children that were not even her own species by our standards, just more humans. But she died on her feet, still fighting. Judge Velshani made careful notes. Officer Zektar, surely you are exaggerating the human response. No species fights without regard for self-preservation. Zektar shook his head violently. That is exactly what we thought. That is exactly what our psychology experts had predicted. But humans do not follow normal behavioral patterns when their families are dead and their world is ash. We learned that humans have something we had never encountered before. They have the ability to choose to continue fighting even when logic says they should surrender. Even when their bodies are failing, even when death is certain. The battle for New Olympia was supposed to last 6 hours. It lasted 3 days. What should have been a simple ground assault became a grinding urban warfare nightmare. Humans turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing field, every room into a trap. They used tactics we had never seen before, improvised weapons we had never imagined, and showed a level of coordination that should have been impossible without central command. And when we finally secured the colony, Zektar concluded, we found something that chilled every soldier to the bone. In the ruins of their central communications building, human survivors had written a message on the wall using their own blood. It said, "Tell the galaxy humanity remembers everything. Humanity forgives nothing. Humanity stops for no one." The courtroom was eerily quiet as Zektar finished describing the first battle. Even the judges seemed disturbed by what they had heard. It was clear that this was only the beginning of humanity's response to the destruction of their homeworld. And if New Olympia was any indication, the galaxy was about to learn exactly what humans were capable of when they had nothing left to lose. The tribunal had called for a brief recess after Zektar's description of New Olympia. When they reconvened, the alien officer seemed even more agitated than before. His claws had worn grooves in the metal chair, and his compound eyes darted constantly around the room as if searching for threats that were not there. Judge Velshani looked at her notes before addressing him. Officer Zektar, the tribunal understands that the battle for New Olympia was more difficult than expected. However, surely one colony's resistance could not have affected the outcome of an entire campaign involving 12,000 hegemony ships. Zektar let out a sound that might have been laughter, if it had not been so full of despair. Honored Judge, New Olympia was just the beginning. That was where we learned humans do not fight like other species. But what came next? What came next showed us that humans do not just fight differently, they think differently about warfare itself. After New Olympia, Admiral Krextar became concerned about the length of the campaign. He ordered massive fleet movements to crush the remaining human colonies quickly. Our intelligence suggested that humans had approximately 47 scattered settlements across 4 star systems. The Admiral deployed our forces to hit all of them simultaneously. Judge Court asked, what was unusual about the human response to this escalation? The humans did something we had never encountered in 400 years of warfare, Zektar replied, his voice growing distant. They stopped trying to defend their colonies. Instead, they began attacking us in ways that made no military sense. Their remaining ships, those pathetic converted civilian vessels, and started ramming our warships. At first we thought it was desperation. A human cargo vessel would approach one of our destroyers, and we assumed they were trying to surrender. Then they would accelerate to maximum speed and crash into our ship's hull. The damage was minimal to us, but it destroyed them completely. We could not understand why they would throw away their lives for such small tactical gains. Judge Limara, her form shifting to purple, interjected, "That does sound like desperate, irrational behavior." "That is what we thought," Zektar said, his mandibles clicking frantically. But then we realized the humans were not being irrational. They were being strategic in a way we had never imagined. Each ramming attack was carefully planned. They were not trying to destroy our ships. They were trying to damage our sensors, our communication arrays, our docking bays. They were systematically blinding us and isolating us from each other. Within 2 weeks, our fleet coordination began to break down. Ships that should have been in constant communication were operating in isolation. Repair facilities that should have been protected were under constant assault. Supply lines that should have been secure were being cut by ships that appeared from nowhere, struck fast and vanished before we could respond. Judge Velshani frowned. "But surely the hegemony's superior technology gave you overwhelming advantages in ship-to-ship combat." Zektar's entire body began to shake. "That is what we thought. Our plasma cannons could destroy human ships in a single hit. Our armor could withstand anything in their arsenal. Our shields could deflect their missiles. But none of that mattered when the humans started doing the impossible. They began capturing our technology, not just studying it, actually taking it from destroyed ships and somehow making it work on their vessels. Within a month, human ships were using hegemony weapon systems. Within 2 months, they were improving on our designs." Judge Court rumbled in disbelief. How could a primitive species reverse engineer hegemony technology so quickly? "We asked ourselves the same question," Zektar replied. "Our scientists had spent centuries developing those systems. Our technology was based on principles that should have been completely alien to human understanding. Yet somehow they not only figured out how our weapons worked, they found ways to make them more efficient. I remember the first time one of our cruisers was destroyed by its own weapons technology. A human ship, barely larger than one of our fighters, had somehow mounted 3 of our plasma cannons on its hull. The power requirements should have been impossible. The structural stress should have torn the ship apart. But there it was, using our own weapons against us with devastating effectiveness." Zektar paused, his breathing becoming more labored. But the captured technology was not the worst part. The worst part was when humans began developing weapons specifically designed to terrorize us. They studied our biology, our psychology, our deepest fears, and then they weaponized that knowledge against us. Judge Limara asked, "What do you mean by weapons designed to terrorize?" Zektar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "They created sonic weapons that broadcast sounds on frequencies that caused panic reactions in our species. Not just loud noises, specific frequencies that triggered our flight responses, that made us hear the death calls of our young, that filled our minds with artificial nightmares. They developed chemical compounds that disrupted our pheromone communication systems. Suddenly, soldiers could not recognize their own squad mates. Officers could not tell friend from foe. Entire battalions would dissolve into chaos as their basic social instincts turned against them. But the most terrifying weapon they created was psychological. They would capture our soldiers alive, study how we thought and what we feared, and then they would leave elaborate traps designed not just to kill us, but to break our minds before our bodies died." Judge Velshani looked disturbed. "Can you give us a specific example of these psychological weapons?" Zektar closed his eyes as if trying to block out a memory. "The Kethver garrison. 2,000 of our finest soldiers, stationed on an asteroid mining facility that humans should never have been able to reach. When our relief force arrived, they found the entire garrison dead, not killed in battle, dead from terror. The humans had somehow infiltrated the facility and turned it into a nightmare maze. They had used our own holographic systems to create visions of our worst fears around every corner. They had programmed the life support systems to produce sounds that mimicked the distress calls of our families. They had rigged the lighting to create shadows that moved like predators from our homeworld. Our soldiers had not been killed by weapons. They had been killed by fear itself. Some had died from heart failure caused by panic. Others had killed themselves rather than face whatever horrors the humans had created for them. A few had simply gone insane and were found curled up in corners, chittering meaninglessly about Earth and remembering, and never stopping. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the judges seemed shaken by the description of such calculated psychological warfare. Judge Court finally spoke, his voice lower than usual. Officer Zektar, are you saying that humans deliberately chose to wage psychological warfare rather than direct military engagement? Not instead of direct engagement, Zektar corrected. In addition to it, they fought us on every level simultaneously, physical, technological, and psychological. They adapted to our strengths and exploited our weaknesses faster than we thought possible. They learned from every battle, incorporated every lesson, and became more dangerous with each passing day. By the 4th month of the campaign, our soldiers were afraid to board captured human ships because they had been turned into death traps. Our officers were afraid to use standard communication frequencies because humans had learned to jam them with sounds that drove our crews insane. Our strategists were afraid to make predictable moves because humans seemed to anticipate our tactics before we even implemented them. Judge Limara asked, how is this possible? How could a species with such limited military experience outthink seasoned hegemony commanders? Zektar looked up at her with haunted eyes. Because they were not thinking like soldiers anymore. They were thinking like survivors. Like a species that had lost everything and had nothing left to lose except their determination to make us pay for what we had done. And that honored judges made them the most dangerous opponents the galaxy has ever seen. The war was no longer about conquest or territory or resources. For humans, it had become about something much simpler and much more terrifying, complete and total revenge. And as we were about to learn, there is no limit to what humans will do when they are fighting for revenge. By now, Zektar was barely holding himself together. The court medic had administered mild sedatives, but his trembling had only gotten worse as his testimony continued. Judge Velshani looked concerned but knew they needed to hear the end of his account. Officer Zektar, and she said gently, we understand this is difficult, but the tribunal needs to know how the campaign ended. What was the final outcome of the hegemony's engagement with humanity? Zektar looked up, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, his compound eyes seemed to focus clearly on the judges. The campaign never ended, honored judge. That is what you need to understand. That is what the galaxy needs to understand. The war against humanity can never end because humans will not allow it to end. Judge Court rumbled. Explain what you mean, officer. By the 6th month of our campaign, the Third Fleet was no longer an attacking force. We had become the hunted. Human ships appeared everywhere, in our supply lines, around our bases, even in systems we thought were completely secure. They moved like ghosts, struck like lightning, and vanished before we could retaliate. Admiral Krextar became desperate. He ordered the fleet to regroup at Staging Base Omega, our most heavily fortified position. 12,000 ships, 2 million soldiers, enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. We thought we were gathering our strength for a final decisive blow against the remaining human forces. Zektar paused, his breathing becoming more labored. But the humans were not trying to avoid that final battle. They were orchestrating it, everything they had done for 6 months. Every attack, every ambush, every psychological operation had been designed to drive us to that exact position at that exact time. Judge Limara, her form now a deep crimson, asked, how could they have planned such a complex strategy with their command structure destroyed? That was our fundamental mistake, Zektar replied. We assumed that destroying Earth would break their command structure. We were wrong. Destroying Earth had not broken their command structure. It had simplified it. Every human ship, every human soldier, every human civilian had the same order: destroy the hegemony. There was no need for complex coordination because they all had the same goal. When we gathered at Staging Base Omega, we thought we were positioning ourselves for victory. Instead, we had gathered every important hegemony asset in one place, exactly where the humans wanted us. And then they showed us what 12 billion dead civilians had taught them about warfare. Judge Velshani leaned forward. What happened at Staging Base Omega? Zektar closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. The humans had spent 6 months preparing the perfect trap. They had captured enough of our technology to build weapons we never imagined. They had studied our psychology enough to know exactly how to break our morale. And they had learned enough about our tactics to predict our every move. The attack began at 0730 ship time. Not with weapons, but with sound. Every communication frequency, Every emergency channel, every private comm link suddenly filled with the same transmission. It was a human voice, calm, clear, speaking in perfect hegemony standard. The message was simple. This is Earth calling. We remember everything. We forgive nothing. We are coming home. Then they came. Not dozens of ships, not hundreds, thousands of human vessels appeared simultaneously around our position. Ships we had never seen before, built from the wreckage of our own fleet. Ships that should not have been possible, powered by technology that should not have existed, crewed by humans who should have been dead. Judge Court asked, "How many human ships attacked your position?" Zektar laughed, but it was a sound of pure horror. "All of them. Every human ship in existence. Every converted civilian vessel. Every captured hegemony cruiser. Every impossible hybrid they had built from scavenged materials." But that was not the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that they were not trying to defeat us in battle. They were trying to capture us. All of us. Every ship, every soldier, every officer. They wanted us alive because death was too easy. They wanted us to live with what we had done. They wanted us to carry the memory of 12 billion dead humans for the rest of our lives. Judge Limara, now a sickly yellow color, whispered, "How is that possible? How could they capture such a massive force?" "Because they had become something beyond our understanding of warfare," Zektar replied. "They used weapons that disabled our ships without destroying them. They used boarding tactics that secured our vessels without killing the crews. They fought with such precision, such coordination, such perfect knowledge of our weaknesses that resistance was futile. And all the while they broadcast messages to us, personal messages. They had somehow obtained the names and family records of every hegemony soldier. They knew about our children, our mates, our parents, and they told us exactly what they planned to do to every hegemony world, every hegemony family, every hegemony child in revenge for Earth." Judge Velshani looked pale. "Officer Zektar, are you saying the humans threatened to commit genocide against the entire hegemony species?" "Not threatened," Zektar corrected. "Promised. They made it very clear that this was not a war for territory or resources or political advantage. This was a war for the complete extinction of our species. Every hegemony world, every hegemony ship, every hegemony life was forfeit. They would not stop until the last of us was dead, and they had the patience to hunt us across the galaxy if necessary. But they offered us one choice: surrender completely, submit to human judgment, and perhaps some of us might be allowed to live as slaves in the ruins of our empire. The alternative was total extinction carried out with the same methodical efficiency they had shown in destroying our fleet." Judge Court asked, "What was Admiral Krextar's response to this ultimatum?" Zektar's voice became even quieter. Admiral Krextar shot himself rather than face the humans directly. His final message to the fleet was, "Do not let them take you alive. Death is kinder than what they have planned." But it was too late for noble suicides. The humans had already boarded our command ship. I was there when they brought the human commander to our bridge. She was small even by human standards, young-looking, with strange wet tears running down her face. But her eyes contained such hatred, such absolute determination, that every hegemony officer present began to tremble. She looked around our bridge, studied our faces, and then she said something that will haunt me until the day I die. "My name is Commander Sarah Chen. I was born on Earth. I lost my parents, my siblings, my children, and my entire world because of what you did. Now I'm going to make sure that every member of your species understands exactly what that loss feels like." And then she smiled. It was the most terrifying expression I've ever seen on any creature's face. It was not the smile of someone who enjoyed causing pain. It was the smile of someone who had found purpose in the complete destruction of their enemies. It was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose and all the time in the universe to make us pay. The courtroom was completely silent. The judges sat back in their chairs, clearly overwhelmed by the implications of what they had heard. Judge Velshani finally spoke. "Officer Zektar, how did you survive to testify here today if the humans captured the entire Third Fleet?" Zektar looked up at her with hollow eyes. "They released me. One ship, one survivor, sent back to the hegemony homeworld with a message. I am not a refugee, honored judges. I am a messenger. The humans wanted the galaxy to know what they are capable of when their families are murdered, and their world is destroyed. The message was simple. Any species that threatens humanity will face the same fate as the Third Fleet. Any government that attacks human worlds will be hunted to extinction. Any military force that harms human civilians will be destroyed with the same methodical thoroughness that we experienced. Judge Limara, now a sickly green, asked, "Where are the humans now?" Zektar's entire body began to shake violently. "Everywhere. They are rebuilding their fleet, establishing new colonies spreading across the galaxy. But they have not forgotten what we did. They will never forget. Every human ship carries the names of the 12 billion dead. Every human soldier swears an oath to remember Earth. Every human child learns the story of what the hegemony did to their homeworld. The war is not over, honored judges. The war will never be over. Humanity has become something the galaxy has never seen before. An entire species united by grief, driven by rage, and empowered by the absolute certainty that they have nothing left to lose. They will hunt us until every last hegemony life is extinguished, and they have the patience to spend centuries doing it." Zektar looked directly at each judge in turn, his compound eyes focusing with desperate intensity. "That is what I came here to tell you. That is what the galaxy needs to understand. We thought we were conquering a primitive species. Instead, we created something that will haunt our nightmares for generations. We created humans with nothing to lose, and there is nothing in the universe more dangerous than that. The Third Fleet is gone. The hegemony is broken. And somewhere out there, human ships are coming for every world that supported what we did, every government that approved our actions, every species that stood by and watched while we burned Earth.